I want to welcome all of you here tonight for this Rosenmeier Forum and to mention the fact that we are proud of the fact that we have the Center for State and Local Government, the Rosenmeier Center for State and Local Government here at Central Lakes College in order to preserve the legacy of Gordon Rosenmeier, who you all know was one of the most, or the most influential legislator in all of Minnesota history, a very principled person, a person of integrity. He saw public service as a good cause, and we benefited by his leadership in the 30 years he served in the Minnesota State Senate from 1940 to 1970. It is my distinct honor to introduce to you tonight our Rosenmeier Forum guest speaker. Patrick Plonski has served since 2003 as Executive Director of Books for Africa, the world's largest shipper of donated books to schools, community libraries, and universities to the African continent. Books for Africa has shipped over 60 million books and 6 million digital books to all of the 55 nations that make up the African continent. Patrick Plonski and his work for Books for Africa has traveled to 48 countries in his career. In his work for Books for Africa, Patrick has traveled to many African nations and including many European countries as well. In his work, Plonski has partnered with organizations such as the United Nations, the U.S. Agency for International Development, the Peace Corps, the Library of Congress, the U.S. State Department and the U.S. Department of Defense, and Oprah's Angel Network. He has also worked closely with Senator Amy Klobuchar and Representative Betty McCormick of St. Paul, who have worked with him on legislation relating to Books for Africa in aligning them with the organizations that I just mentioned. Previous to his work with Books for Africa, Mr. Plonski served as the Executive Director of the Minnesota Agricultural Education Leadership Council at the University of Minnesota, where he also served as an adjunct professor teaching courses on world development issues. Patrick also served in the House as the House Committee on Agriculture Administrator when I was chairman of the House Agriculture Committee. And you did that, Patrick, for 11 years under my tenure as chairman of the House Agriculture Committee. Mr. Plonski holds a degree from St. John's University and a master's in history from the University of Minnesota. He holds a PhD in international education from the University of Minnesota. Mr. Plonski was also awarded a Cargill Fellowship to do agricultural research in Belgium and Hungary, and did similar agriculture research in Italy and Poland. He also served in the Minnesota Trade Office's agriculture delegations to New Zealand and to Denmark as well. It truly can be said of Patrick Plonski that he has traveled a far piece, and some of that journey has been touched with glory. I remember Patrick telling me in 2005 that Andrew Young, who was President Carter's U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, called him to say that he would be picking him up in Minneapolis to fly to Nigeria. And of course I was envious, but that must have been quite an experience. Another time in 1987, members of Patrick's family and I, along with some of my relatives from Little Falls, were invited to a personal audience with Pope John Paul II at the Vatican in Rome, Italy. Pope John Paul II is now a canonized saint in the Catholic Church, and to be in pictures with St. John Paul II was and is indeed very, very special. Finally, in 2015, Mr. Plonski called me to tell me that former President Jimmy Carter was putting on a fundraiser for Books for Africa at his presidential library in Atlanta, Georgia, and would I like to go? Obviously I did, and I got to spend 2 half days with the former president, including observing his chairing his library board meeting on a Saturday morning, and he was 91 years old, and I said at the time he would live to be 100, and he turns 100 on October 1st of this year. And then one final thing I want to mention is the fact that we are celebrating the end of Black History Month, which is being celebrated throughout the nation. And this forum tonight, Books for Africa, we're at the end of February now when it ends. And so Books for Africa, it's very consistent that and appropriate that we are having Mr. Plonski here to tell us about his organization, Books for Africa. With no further ado, it's my honor and privilege to introduce to you Mr. Patrick Plonski, Executive Director of Books for Africa.
Thank you, Steve, for that generous introduction. Thank you, everyone, for coming. It's my pleasure to be back in central Minnesota. I had the privilege, as Steve mentioned, of working in his office with the House of Representatives Committee of Agriculture, and did travel up to central Minnesota quite often in those days. And so I enjoyed it very much, those 11 years. Those 11 years I spent at the legislature working with Steve were key in developing skills that I now use at Books for Africa. I oftentimes do things every day that I am able to advance initiatives because I learned the skills in Steve's office and how to get things done, because that was always the key thing. Is what do you want to achieve and how do you get it done? And so back then it was legislation and initiatives of that sort. Now it's about putting together partnerships to send books to Africa. So the training was quite helpful to me, and it's still being put to good use, hopefully. So as Steve mentioned, Books for Africa is the world's largest shipper of books to Africa. We were founded in 1988. That was 35 years ago. And the mission is simple. We ship high-quality books and educational materials to schools and libraries anywhere in Africa, across the African continent. So over 30 years, we've sent 60 million books, and we have served every one of the 55 countries on the African continent. Every single country in Africa, the continent has received books from Books for Africa. And in addition, we sent about 6 million digital books, and those are located on tablets or computers, desktops, or laptops. And so we load up also computers that we sent and load them with digital content as an option. We are based in St. Paul, Minnesota. So if anyone here or anybody in Minnesota wants to donate books to Africa, we take them. Books have been donated from Central Lakes College to Books for Africa, and they are in Africa now. So we appreciate donations from Central Lakes College and many, many institutions all over the world, frankly. Our headquarters is in St. Paul, Minnesota. Our main warehouse is located in Atlanta, Georgia. Our warehouse there is about the size of a football field. Our warehouse in Minnesota is about 4 times the size of this auditorium. But they all serve their needs, and we're very cost effective. So we just celebrated our 35th anniversary in September of this year. And I had about 350 people there, and our keynote speaker was the ambassador to the United States from South Sudan. We also had the ambassador from Tanzania there, and other dignitaries, including from Nigeria, some of our key partners. One of our initiatives, and that was the theme of this year, last year was our 35th year. This is our 36th year. The theme was a book for every child. And so it's part of our goal, our mission would be to have a book in every child's hand in Africa. So we continue to work on that. That is about many millions of books. So how does this work? It's these things can be as complicated or as simple as you choose to make them. On one level, it's very simple. We collect donated books from schools, libraries, publishers, and companies. We collect them, we sort them, orders come in from Africa, and we ship them. Every container is packed to order. A container is about a semi-trailer truck of books. So if you see a semi-trailer truck on the road, if it's packed tight with books, 20 tons of books, that's a container, and that's our standard shipment to Africa is a sea container. It costs about $11,000 to send one of those, so that's not, that's not an inconsequential amount of money, but it's manageable for things like a church or a Rotary Club or a small family foundation. So we work with a lot of different organizations to collect these books and send them. We collect in Minnesota, send them to Atlanta, and then in Atlanta, of course, there are also books coming in all the time. The warehouse is very full, and it's got about 15,000 volunteers there every year sorting those books. Those are volunteers. So groups come in from Delta or Home Depot or you name it, different universities, and they sort books in our warehouse. So the first question, is it good to go to Africa? And if the answer is, if it's not too old or not too damaged, or the topic is not useful in Africa, then it gets recycled. If it's in good shape and the topic is useful, then it's good to go to Africa. And then we organize it by categories. We put them in the racks, and then it's a demand-driven system. So people ask for books, and we send them to wherever they're wanted and needed. So this chart shows, container shipments by every fiscal year. And so you see there in 1990, it was pretty close to zero. And last year, we sent over 200 container units. A semi-trailer truck or a standard shipment is 2 container units because there's 20-foot containers, 40-foot containers. We send 40s. So if you look at 20 or 200 container units, that's about 100 semi-trailers that we sent last year alone to Africa. And they go on this, like this picture shows. This is a ocean-going sea container. Maersk is the big player in the sea container shipments to Africa and many other countries. So a lot of times it's working to get our containers onto those Maersk ships and get them to Africa. So 4 million books shipped last year alone, and this just sort of shows over the years it's slowly but steadily going up. Our mission is always to send more books in any year than the previous year, and so that's kind of how we've built ourselves, is from starting in a church basement to being the world's largest shipper of books to Africa. And there were, when I started this job about 21 years ago, there were a number of organizations that did this. A lot of them weren't able to continue. They went bankrupt. They just couldn't keep it going, and we're one of the few that's managed to keep it going. And some of that, I think, has to do with continuing to get economies of scale. So in international development, that's an important terminology, as it is in business, economies of scale. If you can build economies of scale, you can be much more efficient, and the cost per unit goes down. The cost of sending a book to Africa is about 50 cents. So we can, if someone gives us $1, we can send 2 books. Somebody gives us $1,000, we can send 2,000 books. The math works like that. So this just shows over the past 12 months, last fiscal year. We operate on a July 1 to July 1 fiscal year. So over a 12-month period, this is where we sent our books. So you see that Kenya was the #1 recipient. receiving 966,708 books. And then it goes down to Ghana, South Africa, Sierra Leone, and just continues on. And this is all demand driven. I didn't pick Kenya, the donors picked Kenya. So if we're able to put together financing, or a donor comes to us and wants to send books to Kenya or whatever country it is, that's how it's decided. And so that's how some of our success is building on the strengths of those business principles, supply and demand. And last year, we sent about 798,000 digital books. So last year alone, we sent books to 32 countries. We sent 8 law libraries donated by Thomson Reuters. These are for law libraries, a full law library. So yeah, it was a good year. And the value of those books exceeded $32 million. So that was a pretty good year. This chart shows over our history where we have sent books. So like last year, Kenya was the #1 country. As fate should have it, Kenya is our #1 recipient country of all time, over 35 years. So they've received over 6.5 million books, followed by Ethiopia, Ghana, Nigeria, and down the line. Now, Kenya isn't the largest country in Africa by population. Nigeria is the most populous country in Africa, followed by Ethiopia. Ghana is quite small. Why Kenya? Some of these things are just the luck of the draw. It's where the demand was. There's a lot of Kenyans in Minnesota, the diaspora that we work with. We work with a lot of diaspora all over the world. And so it's part of how we get it done is by working with Africans in Africa, or Africans who are now living in the United States, the diaspora, or elsewhere in the world. They're the ones who really keep this on track, make sure we're sending the right books, doing things the right way. And so they're using their connections to Africa to help us to achieve the goal. And so the Kenyans have done very good work here, and also we've been able to secure funding for Kenya. In particular, there's a Rotary Club in South Carolina, and they're working very hard on Kenya, and they keep pushing more books to Kenya, and so that's part of the reason why Kenya is on this list. And so all these countries have been served, but this just, the dark part shows that those countries that are the top recipients. Most of them, of course, English speaking. Most of the books we send are English, because that's what we get in the door. That's what we have to offer. We do also have books in other languages, sometimes even custom printing, but mostly English is what we have, and so English is what they get. And most of these countries are formerly colonized by the British, and so English is the language, the official language, or one of the official languages. And so as a result, English is prevalent in these countries, especially East Africa, South Africa, and even into Ghana and Western Africa. The old British Commonwealth countries, many African countries retained, in fact, most of them retained a Western language after their freedom from colonialism, and they did it for reasons of utility. It was a way to unite the country. There's like 800 languages spoken in Africa, tribal languages, local village languages, but there's a handful of major world languages. Arabic in North Africa, French in Central and West Africa, Portuguese in a few places, and then English everywhere else. And even where other languages are prevalent, everybody wants to learn English because it's the #1 second language in the world. And it's sort of the lingua franca of the world is English, more than any other language. And so huge demand for English. People want to learn English, and the world in many ways runs on English. And that's the demand, why there's so much demand for English language books. So who do we work with, and how can we work with them? shipping sponsorships. That's money to send a container. Can cost about, sometimes we get a good deal with donated freight, say from the U.S. Department of Defense, which is something we can do. That's maybe like $6,000. If you're sending a container into the heart of Africa, that could be $30,000. The average price is $11,000, though, to ship 20 tons of books to any water port in Africa. So we get sponsorships, people who want to send books to specific places. We get individual donations from people who say, keep up the good work, here's some money, that underwrites the operation. We get donated shipping containers from sponsors. So as I mentioned, the U.S. Department of Defense, last year alone, they provided us with 30 donated containers as part of a very, very small program in the Department of Defense. But it's important to us, but it's minuscule to them. And so the value of that is, if we had to pay for that, that would be about $300,000, the value of that shipping that we got. Other things we can use, contacts with the right people. This picture here shows the African Union ambassador and some of the members of the African Diplomatic Corps in Washington at a program. We work with anyone who will work with us, who wants to help us and collaborate with. And so, but some people have more capacity to help than others. And so while we appreciate any and all support, people who have access to resources can really help us in a big way. But, and sometimes it's the way they help us is they'll be the head of, or they'll be a member of a Rotary Club, let's say, and then that Rotary Club will decide to sponsor a container, and they'll raise the money as a club. That's how Books for Africa got started 35 years ago, was through Rotary. Rotary clubs got the first containers going before anyone else. So these are just some of the partners that we have worked with over the years. Some you maybe know, some maybe you don't. The African Union, of course, that's like all African countries are members of the African Union. It's headquartered in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. We work with them to stay on track. The Department of State there, we work with U.S. embassies across Africa. I've visited a lot of embassies. I try to visit the embassy every time I go to Africa. We've worked with the Department of Defense, as I noted, especially Congresswoman Betty McCollum has been very helpful in coordinating that. As a member of the U.S. The House of Representatives Appropriations Committee on Defense. She's the ranking minority member, so she's in a position to be helpful. And so we work with her and Department of Defense. Rotary, the Peace Corps. A lot of our books have been distributed by Peace Corps members, and then a variety of other publishers and different NGOs and suppliers of books, some of which you may know, some of which you may not. Thomson Reuters there. They are the world's largest producer of law books in the world, and they give us lots of law books. So as I noted, 2023 was a record-breaking year. We sent 4 million books, over 4 million books, which set a record. We sent 30 container shipments through Department of Defense, and we hosted the Peace Corps director in St. Paul. That's a picture of her there. So it's all about connections. It's about knowing the right people and finding ways to connect with them to get good things done. So these are some of our initiatives. I like this picture. This is, these are some of our books being delivered in Uganda by boat in this case. Sometimes they've been delivered, with a big semi-truck. Sometimes they're delivered with a bicycle. Sometimes they're delivered by boats. Different ways of delivering books across Africa. And so we're always looking at different ways of getting things done. Some of our initiatives, French language books. We're packing a container right now in Montreal to send French books to Democratic Republic of the Congo. Also a container is being packed in Paris that will go there. So we send books in French when we can. We are also printing books in local languages. We've printed books in about 6 different languages over the years. It's much more cost effective to send donated English language books, but we will print them occasionally if we can get the resources. Digital content, I talked about that. And unique partnerships. And these are some of our unique partnerships. So we work with Merck, the big pharmaceutical company. They help us and finance the delivery of medical books to hospitals, clinics, and medical schools all over Africa. Our Books for Africa publishing initiative, of course, that's our publishing of books in local languages. French books, the Girls Empowerment collections, we send a lot of collections of cherry-picked books that are about women who have done great things in the world, and get those into libraries in Africa to help inspire the younger generation of girls about what the future holds. About 50% of African women are illiterate, and so it's important to focus on certain groups, certain demographic groups. The Law Initiative, Law and Democracy Initiative, very popular, and lawyers like to donate to that. It's another opportunity to connect with a different group, and Thomson Reuters donates about 10 law libraries a year that we send. We have an agricultural initiative that sends little mini egg libraries, and of course memorial libraries. Sometimes donors will come to us and they'll want to memorialize a library in someone's name, maybe their family's name or someone who passed away. So that's something that we do also. The French books, as I noted, Paris and Montreal are where we get those. This is just a listing of French-speaking countries in Africa. And as you can see, there's quite a few. So it is important that we serve them to the extent that we can. And digital content. I've been at Books for Africa for 21 years. From day one, we were asked that question. Well, aren't digital books going to take over the situation? Why are we even worrying about paper books when the future is digital? And someday that will happen, I suspect. But for the here and the now, huge demand for paper books, not only in Africa, but everywhere in the world. Last statistic I saw was that about 80% of the books read were still read in traditional format with paper. Now, digital is more and more picking up, and so we want to be cognizant of that. But if you're in a village and there's no electricity in the village, it's not very good for your e-reader or your tablet. And so we even go so far as to send solar lamps so that the books can be read more easily. So, we just have to know that Africa is the poorest place. It's the poorest, other than Antarctica, it's the poorest continent in the world, especially sub-Saharan Africa. And so things like electricity are not readily available. Internet, not readily available. Sometimes schools and roads and teachers. There are many things that are not available in Africa that we have here. So in all of that, we have decided, and our supporters, that books are something that we can do to help, and we can do it cost effectively, and that's why we focus our efforts on books. But we do send digital books also, and I think that's going to be a growth for the future, and so we'll continue to assist as we can there. And the local public, we've published books. A lot of times the books are published in Hong Kong, our local language books. So what we'll do is we'll go to a publisher and find some books that we like or that our partner in Africa likes. They'll say, okay, we like these 10 titles. Get them translated into a local language. Get them printed. The cheapest place to print books is Hong Kong. Have them shipped to Africa, and then they're distributed. That's a standard technique, There are other ways to do it. Another way to do it is to print them in the US, put them in our warehouse in Atlanta, and then we did this with a Somali project. Every container that goes to Somalia out of Atlanta gets some of those Somali books. That's another way to do it. Third way to do it is to print them in Africa and then have our partners pick them up. We did that a couple of years ago in Ethiopia. So different ways to do, there's always different ways to get things done, different paths to success. And so we're always looking at different ways to do things. What is the most cost-effective way to do something? What's the end result? If we can get the same or a better end result for less money, that's invariably what we do. All right, girls' empowerment collections, I talked about that. Feedback and evaluation. So how do we know this works? It's hard to know if this works. We do surveys. We've gotten survey recipients from 36 different countries since 2016, and the survey results are pretty high, indicating that the books are useful and the books are of high quality. In other words, we don't want to send junk. And so that's always the first question. Were these books, whenever I meet one of the partners in Africa who got books, I say, were the books helpful? Were they useful? That's the important thing. Were the books useful and were they of high quality? And so the feedback we're getting says yes, but it's a big continent there, and so it can be hard to know, and because really to do it scientifically, we'd have to do surveys of all the schools in Africa and do a pre-test before they had books, and then do a post-test after they had books, and about 5-8 years to measure the impacts, and then compare it to the control group. I did a project like that in Tanzania, had good results. That's a couple of schools in one country. Very hard, very expensive to do that. So we just used the money to send more books because that would be millions of dollars to do that. It is a little bit of a leap of faith, but the Africans that we're working with say, hey, these books are useful. We need more. The African diaspora or the Africans in Africa always asking for more and saying that it's useful. To some extent, you have to take people at their word, especially if they're paying for it themselves. Many African universities will finance their own deliveries of books. They won't have a donor pay for it. They'll pay for deliveries themselves. So that's a level of assurance. That and surveys, and of course the anecdotal. Visiting schools and libraries in Africa. I've visited many schools and libraries in Africa. I've seen a lot of excitement from the kids. So they seem quite happy to have received the books and the opportunity to learn. And then boots on the ground, anecdotal information, I think is part of it. Also I have to brag a little bit. We are in the top, Books for Africa, the top 3% of all charities in the United States as measured by Charity Navigator. Part of that's because we're so efficient. We can send $30 million worth of books on about $3 million in cash because of the in-kind value of the books. So the efficiency is quite high. So with that, I'm going to stop the formal part of the presentation, and I think we're going to take some questions, but I believe there might be some panelists who are going to handle the Q&A. Am I right on that? So I will just move over here, and maybe if you guys want to go to it, will be at your disposal. Hey, how you doing? Hey, how you doing? Hey. That's
Des?
All right, my first question I have is to ask you is, what do you think about the digital books and e-readers and their role in the international literacy and the world development?
Yeah, thank you. Digital books, I read books on my e-reader, and I also read books on, on a paper book. I think they bring different advantages. A paper book, you can drop it and it won't break. You just pick it up and you can keep reading it. An e-reader, I've stopped bringing them to Africa because I've left so many in planes, and so I've ended up leaving my whole library in a plane. Sometimes the advantage becomes the disadvantage. You can put so much information on them that it's like it's valuable, but if one of those costs whatever $100 and you break it or you leave it behind, or in Africa, where people don't have as much money, that kind of stuff has a way of disappearing. It's just natural, and so as a result, there are some issues with it. But I do think it has its place, and I think it's going to continue to grow. But people don't really come to Books for Africa begging for digital books. What they really want is hard copy books, and that might be because they know that's what we have, or it might be because that's what they want. I think it's probably a little of both. There's huge demand for traditional books in Africa. And I think that digital content and e-readers and such, I think it will continue to grow.
Thank you. And my second question I have is, how should we weigh in the importance of international literacy against other development worlds?
Yeah, this is another important question because, there's a lot of needs in Africa and the developing world. There's hunger, there's diseases, there's economic development needs, there's security needs, and so all of that's needed. And so my view is that people can pick whatever they want and provide assistance in that area. So if you're really interested in food, there's lots of nonprofits and government entities that are engaged in food relief. Same with medicine, same with everything. There are many who believe that education is as important or more important in that it's preventative. It prevents problems in the future. If you have an educated workforce, then you will be able to grow more food. You will be able to address disease issues, and so that education and literacy is foundational. As one professor once told me, you can't run a country on a grade school education. You need highly educated people to run a country, and so it's just elementary. So I think it plays a role, and I would just say, sometimes, if people want to donate to one thing versus another thing, that's fine. But sometimes people will say, well, I'm not going to give to what you're doing because you should really be working on something else. And I say, well, no, you should be working on something. If it's that important to you, then you should work on it. I'm going to keep working on education and literacy because that's my thing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My first question is, what is the current literacy rate in Africa?
The literacy rate is about 70%, which means about 30% are illiterate, and it varies from one country to another. So 70% sounds pretty good, except when you do those numbers, there's about 830 million illiterate people in Africa. And then when you look at it further, women and girls are especially lacking in literacy. So, it's unequal. And then, of course, I think rural areas have less of everything. There's less schools, less less economic development. And so I think the literacy rates are higher in rural areas because there's less resources. It remains an issue. Literacy globally, I think over the last 20, 30 years, from a development standpoint, there's been a lot of good news. Literacy has gone up. Hunger has gone down. Economic development has gone up. There's been a lot of good. Disease has gone down. Malaria rates have gone down. So there's been a lot of good news over the last couple decades, but that still leaves millions of people, 800 million people illiterate in Africa. And so I think we need to continue to work at it. The other thing is literacy it's a definition of, are you literate or are you not? All right, so maybe a person can write their name or a sentence, but are they functional? They may be literate technically, but how functional is their literacy? Also, what's the utility of the language that they're literate in? If they're literate in one language, but let's say the country runs on English, then they're held back because of they're in effect they're literate in the wrong language or a language that's less useful.
My second question is, why is international development of importance to the people of Minnesota and the United States?
Yeah, my view is that this world is so interconnected, and we saw that with the COVID crisis, which came out of China and impacted the whole world. Millions of people died. We all had to wear masks and get immunized because of something that happened half a world away. And so I think that the impacts are just so global now that not only the things that can hurt you, but the things that could benefit you are a world away. Many of our phones were assembled in China, let's say, or Vietnam or somewhere. The world continues to be a very global place, and I think that if we look at development, I think we can stop problems from happening. I think we can take advantage of markets to help us. And I think that there's also the moral imperative of, if we have resources more than other people, there's a certain, on some level, we should help out if we can. Thank you.
My first question is, how has literacy and/or education been positively impacted by Books for Africa? Have the books that have been sent been having a positive impact and doing any good?
Yeah, that's. I ask myself that question every day. And hopefully we all do, whatever we're doing in this world. Is this working? Am I making a difference? Is this, is this a positive impact? I think as I had alluded to earlier, I think all of the information we're getting is yes. There's huge demand for the books we're sending. The surveys that we send out come back and people say, yes, this is very useful. About half of our board is Africans, African diaspora members, different countries. They say, yes, this is what's needed. And I was just over in my home country, and the books are being well used and helpful. So all of that is good. Also, there's been a lot of studies done by the World Bank and U.S. Agency for International Development and other places saying that dollar for dollar, a book is extremely efficient, or a library, very efficient use of development dollars, because you empower people, and it's low cost, high benefit technique, tool. So that all indicates yes, but I think I'm also a born skeptic, and so I'm always looking for more information and always trying to improve what we're doing. And I think I'm a believer in the demand-driven system where if people want it, they will come to you and ask for it. And if they keep coming back for more, that's a good sign. So I think ultimately for me, that's what we hang our hat on, that if we weren't doing good work, we would have gone out of business many, many decades ago.
The second question is, what have you seen in Africa that has stuck with you?
Yeah, I've been to probably 15, 20 African countries. When I first went there back 20, 21 years ago, there was not a lot of, let's say, internet connectivity. So if I wanted to send a message home, I would go to an internet cafe. I don't know if anybody remembers those. We used to have them here too. But you'd go there, and it would take 30 minutes to download an email and another 15 to send it. And so over the course of several hours, you had handled a couple of emails because there just was no bandwidth. It was so cumbersome. Well, okay, now you go there, and every hotel has Wi-Fi just like any place here, and you can have Zoom calls with people in Africa all the time, very easy, and you can use your phone on the streets of Africa. So I think that's something that always struck me as the technology is really quite caught up very well in Africa on some levels. Now these are fancy hotels. People are also living in shacks with mud floors and don't have access to electricity. So you have that haves and have-nots. But just that change over a couple of years, a couple of decades strikes me. I think the other one, when you've been to rural Africa, stuck in a mud puddle or something, which I have, you just feel like you are in the middle of nowhere, and the people who live there must feel the same way. Just the feeling of being in such a remote place. I grew up on a farm in southern Minnesota, and I thought that was remote, out there hoeing weeds out of the beans. But you haven't seen remote until you've been in some very rural areas of Africa where there just doesn't seem to be a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah. The only other thing I'd say is the excitement with the books. I guess I've been to, usually when I visit a school in Africa, there's a big crowd and there's a celebration, and they're celebrating the arrival of books for a library. And I've never seen such a thing in the United States, people celebrating a library or the addition of books or something like that. So that has stuck with me too. Thank you. I don't know if anybody in the audience has any questions? I know you have questions. Some people had some very good questions before this program started. So.
Good evening. I have a question regarding the funds for the $11,000. That's, from my understanding, what it costs to ship. What is the least amount of time that it takes, or that it has taken you to have the $11,000? From what is the least to the longest?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. So, and again, $11,000 is the cost that we charge to ship to any of the water ports outside of Africa. The least is I've gotten a check within days. I met with a group and they've written a check and boom. We talked to a foundation last month. They had funded us before, and so we set up an appointment and described some projects, and they said, okay, we're gonna do this one and that one, $25,000, and we have the check next week. Other projects, the check never comes. They just never, they not through lack of effort, but so usually it's in the middle between never and next week. I would say the average is like 3-4 months. And, sometimes like if a Rotary Club is working, they'll do Rotary fundraisers, and then some individuals will do it. And so they sort of work towards a target. So you always want to, when somebody contacts us and says, oh, we want to do a container project, it's like, okay, where do you want the container to go? All right, the price is this, so you give them a target. Then we give them a letter, which is what I affectionately call the price quote letter. It's like a very simple contract. It's like, you give us $11,000 and we'll deliver 20 tons of books to Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, to the container depot. You will pay customs clearance. There it is. And so then they'll work from there. Sometimes, we've sent 60 million books in this format, so it works as a model. But a lot of times, people will contact us and we just never hear from them again. They were interested in books, but they didn't have any money or couldn't get any money. Other times it's instantaneous.
Hi, I was wondering if there are any titles, authors, or topics that seem to be more popular in requests that come from them.
It's all good things in moderation. When I was a kid, I always wanted to read Greek mythology, and there was almost no Greek mythology around in my small town. But for me, that was a big thing. So if somebody wants it, they're begging for it. One time I remember I handed this book over to the school, and I think it was a professor of chemistry opens it up and he says, the periodic table of elements was there. And he said, this is exactly what we need. I need this. I'm going to copy this and give it to every student. And he was very excited about that. As a general rule, it depends a little bit about what we're sending. So there's always huge demand for children's books. The Cat in the Hat, that type of book, because it's just, there's a lot of kids, and it's a good way to develop literacy skills. We're sending 5 containers to Zimbabwe in about 2 months, and probably 3 of those containers are children's books, so that's 60 tons of 60 tons of Cat in the Hat in similar books. So that's what we're looking for now. Yeah. But also university books are very expensive. So as a general rule, universities want a full container of university books. Sometimes they have a library, but it's the library's outdated. I've seen full libraries, and they're all the books are from the 50s. It's like, you need, I'd never seen anything like it, and they said, well, this library was donated by the Israeli government in whatever, 1950, and so all of these books, they were good quality, but they were all obsolete. So universities will oftentimes need a full container to upgrade their libraries. So that's a thing too. Sir?
You mentioned duties or customs a few moments ago. Do you have to pay duties when you bring these books in?
Duties, there's always money at the port, always challenges. We have a container right now stuck in Tunisia because the Tunisian Ministry of Education took control of the container, which delayed the process, which cost money, which we'll have to pay. These things happen. We have another container stuck in Accra, Ghana right now, and there's issues of what the valuation is, and this container's full of medical books that are brand new, and so the customs officials are saying, oh, this is worth a fortune, and you need to pay a fortune. fortune like $17,000 to get it out. So those things happen. Sometimes it's very clear and simple. It's a minimum of $1,000 to clear a container in Africa, and probably oftentimes around 5,000. So it's a considerable cost, most often borne by our recipients in Africa.
So you mentioned earlier that you send materials that are appropriate for the countries that they're going to. So my question is, do you have a review board? How does that work? Because at least in this area, there's been a lot of attempts to censor which books are ending up in libraries. I'm
Yeah.
wondering if you're feeling that pressure at all.
Yeah, the books that we send, I get asked this question a lot, especially by ministries of education and their officials, and they will say, they'll ask me the question, do the books that you send meet our curriculum in our country? And I always give the same answer. No, they don't. These books are supplemental to all of the books that you're providing. And that is always the right answer because they nod their heads. Because number one, they don't meet the curriculum because these are books that are just collected, by category. They don't meet a particular curriculum. Number two, they know, and I know, that they have a shortage of books. So when I say these are supplemental to what you're providing, we all know that they're not providing as many as they would like to. So they don't really meet a curriculum per se. We do just sort out very aggressively books. Probably 30% of the books that are donated aren't sent because they're too old, too damaged, or there's issues of topics. Curriculum is not useful. Snowshoeing in northern Minnesota is very exciting, but not in Africa. So we try to stick to basic things like math, sciences, and not get into, once you get into the liberal arts, liberal sciences, things like history and whatnot, that can be tricky. Yeah, we do send that material also, but it can be harder to decide, what to send and what not to send.
Hey, Pat. So actually I got a double question for you. So one of them is in regards to hardware, tablets and whatnot. So have you guys thought about partnering with CLC right now? Those Chromebooks are those tablets. Most of us here in the US, those go to waste. I probably have 6 of them sitting on my counter at home right now. Have you guys thought about getting donations from colleges where they collect them, those Chromebooks and stuff, and you guys can get them from there? Because that's an easy, low cost source there. And then the second question I have is, when you're seeing the emerging technology and how they're affecting different markets, there's really not a market that emerging tech isn't really affecting, and I'm particularly hip-hop. You see these emerging tech and how they're coming out and different tools and applications that can be used. How do you see those tools, does Books for Africa have in their strategic plan or in their, down the road, building these tools into their systems?
Yeah, thank you. So computers, hardware, and software, very much in demand in Africa, computers of all sort. Over the years, computers have been donated to us. There are a couple challenges we face with it. The number one challenge is usually it's best to wash up the software off and install new software. So, similar software in a group of computers so you don't end up with a hodgepodge of computers with different software on it. So there's that. The other issue is it a functional device or not? Because again, we don't want to send junk, so it needs to be functional. and it needs to have up-to-date software and not be filled up with a clutter. And then the other issue that sometimes comes up is it packed to travel? In other words, you know, if we just toss them on a pallet, they'll get broken. So what we have done as systematically for almost 20 years is get our books from a service, and the service is actually provided by Stillwater State Penitentiary, and they will, they have a program there where the prisoners, it's called Computers for Schools, and that program, the schools, they'll get donated excess inventory, computer inventory. They will fix them up, they'll wash the memories, they'll install new memories on them, or new software, and then they provide them to us at a charge, and then we take them and pass that charge on and send them. So we sent a lot of computers to Africa, and then they pack them to travel, which seems like a little thing, but they pack them nicely in a foam box, so that there's a level of assurance when it goes, and somebody pays us for it, that we know that it was operational and that it was fit to travel. Sometimes people will donate computers and they'll say, oh, this is for my project and such, and we'll say, okay, but if they don't work, you know, it's not on us, because we, especially if people are paying money, we don't want to have a situation where they were sent something that wasn't helpful, and then they come back to us. So anytime you're charging money for anything versus just providing it for free, that's an issue. So we do charge money, a surcharge for some things, but and computers are one of those things. The issue of, yeah, AI and those emerging technologies, I think, yeah, is clearly the way of the future. I don't really know the extent to which hard copy books can help with that. I'm sure there are books written about those topics, but you know, I think it just shows that you know, digital technologies and computers are useful, and you know, we'll just have to keep looking at that to see what we can do.
Dr. Plonski, thank you so much for being here and sharing your story and your mission, which helps connect us globally to the people of Africa. I have to ask you the question, here in the United States, you know, we have, and in Minnesota, we have a lot of people who enjoy picking up a book and reading for personal enjoyment, not only to sharpen their own literacy skills, but for personal enjoyment and reading, I'll say, fictional books and stories that are not maybe what you kind of outlined in your work as far as educational materials, law books, medical books, all the way down to elementary and fundamental books to help children start to read. Is there books of fiction or entertainment, I'll say, provided to the people of Africa who are advancing their literary skills?
Yeah, thank you. Great question. In Africa, this is a common complaint or barrier to education and literacy, is that there isn't a culture of reading. And this is Africans who say this all the time, is that we need to instill a culture of reading. And how do you instill a culture of reading without books? So you need to have the books, and then people can read the books. They need to learn to read the books, and once they've learned to read books, then they need to keep reading books. And so that's where I think this comes in, and you're absolutely right. We do send a lot of fiction books. We've really stepped it up in the last 10 years or so. It used to be we thought some books were not highbrow enough to send, and so it's like, well, these are cheap novels, we're not going to send those. Then we've found from some of our partners, just by asking them, that those books were very popular and people wanted to read those. And in fact, not only did they want to read them, the obvious thing is, well, that's how you develop your skills. Because who wants to keep reading a textbook every night? And so you want to read things that are of interest to you, not only for enjoyment, but to continue to build on your skills, your reading skills. And let's face it, fiction books also have a lot of good information. You can learn a lot by reading fiction. So long story short, yes, we do now send a lot of fiction books. The supply and demand issue of it, though, is that there's a lot more in circulation and a lot more donated than we need. So all good things in moderation, but there's probably, we get more of that category of book than we need. But we do send a lot also.
Part of your job.
The hardest part of my job is, I think, it's connected. Fundraising. Because fundraising is all about getting resources. And if we had more resources, we could do more stuff. We could buy more computers to send, and we could load it with software. We could send trainers. We could do all kinds of fun stuff. But as far as this goes, even though we're the world's largest shipper of books to Africa, we're relatively small. A $2 to $3 million budget is a modest budget. And so we have to do what we can and align our nonprofit with our resources. And I think that's the other challenging thing, is how do you align, your resources, and how do you, if you don't get a $1 million grant and you don't ask for it, do you lack vision, or are you wasting your time and you need to spend more time, talking to a Rotary Club down the street, or asking for $10,000 or something from a different group. So it's about figuring out what to do the next day in a way that moves the organization forward. Should you go to Washington and try to insist on a meeting with the USA director and camp out outside her door and have a hunger strike, and until you get $1 million you're not leaving, or is that just going to get you arrested and not going to do anybody any good? Those are the sorts of, I think, challenges. How do you get this done in doing what you can, with the understanding you have limited resources? We all do, but you also want to do the most that you can with your time and resources. And yeah.
Thank the moderators for their participation tonight. David Hurst, David Cody, and Joshua Rogers. Thank you all. Let's give them a big hand. It was a very good program, and I want to thank everybody for their participation tonight. Are there any more questions?
What was the idea where did the idea come from that you wanted to do this?
Great question. The great every nonprofit has the foundation story of how did this nonprofit get started. So I'm remiss I didn't tell you this story. Books for Africa was created by an Englishman who came to the United States right after World War II and there was a depression in England then, and so he comes to Minnesota, and he works for Prudential, and there you go. And he was living in South Minneapolis, but his passion was cars. So there's a car link to Books for Africa. His real thing was cars. So he would go to these car shows and look at old cars. He didn't have any money, but he liked these old cars. And I think over time he bought a couple. And what he noticed is that there was a demand for books. I think this guy had never even gone to college. He had some training in bookkeeping, I think. Tom Worth was his name. He's still on our board. He's still our founder. So Tom Worth was this car collector, or not even much of a collector, but he noticed there was a need for books about cars. So you go to these car shows and see that people wanted to buy books. So he started to collect and resell books to car enthusiasts, and more and more, and he built this business. Literally, he built it in his garage. He would store the books in his garage. Well, he grew and grew, and then he moved to a warehouse in Hudson, Wisconsin, and it grew quite large, had several hundred employees, and he sold it to another company, and he made a lot of money on the sale. So he knew about books, he knew the whole book business, but he didn't have anything to do. His grandfather had been in South Africa, so he thought he didn't have anything to do, so he went to Africa. So he went to South Africa, and he saw a need for books there, and he came back and met with some people, friends of his, publisher types, and just friends, and they created Books for Africa in St. Paul at the University Club of St. Paul, and they sent, the first shipment was a bag of books to a library in Uganda. It's called a mail bag. They mailed it. Used to be a flat rate. You could mail a bag of books called an M bag for mail, and you would send it for, I don't know, whatever, $40 or something. And it was well received. They said, well, we should keep doing this. So that's how it started. And that was 60 million books ago. So he's still on our board, and we continue to try to find ways to stay true to the mission. I think that's an important thing, is sometimes nonprofits go in different directions and they lose track of their roots, and sometimes for good reasons. Sometimes the mission needs to change, but in this case, the mission has stayed the same, and it's just improving how we do it. Yeah.
So I've been to your guys' warehouse a couple times for a couple different events. How would students and faculty, how you guys have events that are upcoming at your guys' warehouse? And the reason I ask, and I don't know about it, is because there's always great music, African music, and it's always really good food. I don't know if you always bring that food. I know what's going on, but I know the food is really good and really authentic.
Yeah.
So is there any opportunities upcoming for students in CLC or faculty to be involved in that?
Yeah. Well, thank you. We do have a couple of events. I met last week with the Rwanda's ambassador to the United States in Washington, D.C., and she's going to come to speak at a fundraiser we're having on May 10th. So there's a breakfast and a noon lunch fundraiser, and she'll be the keynote speaker. It's about a 1-hour program. So anybody who's interested in that, sometimes I've had student groups come down and meet with the ambassador, and it's a fundraiser, so everyone will be asked for money, but that'll be a fun event with the Rwandan ambassador keynoting. It's at I can give you more information. It's on our website, but it's Midland Hills Country Club on May 10th. The event you're talking about, I think we're going to have in July. It's our warehouse open house in St. Paul, and our warehouse manager, as fate should have it, is a rock and roller, so he's got all these friends, and so there's free live music and refreshments. Occasionally we have a congressman speak or something like that, and a lot of fun. It's a low-key event, and the date hasn't been set yet, but it'll be this summer, probably July. So again, information on our website, booksforafrica.org. Thank you. Thank you for the plug on that. Yeah, Steve? Yeah, that's still an opportunity. I think our warehouse is a bit smaller. It doesn't have quite as many books to sort sometimes, but I think if a book collection is done and it's brought down by students, that's very helpful to us. And then the students can unload and do some sorting there. That's always appreciated. We collect books from all over North America and even Montreal and Europe. Books have been sent out of London all over to Africa. But the advantage of being here in Minnesota is we're pretty close to our Minnesota warehouse. So it's accessible in terms of donating books. And yeah, we appreciate those university books. I've been to a lot of African universities, and like I said, sometimes the books they have, if they have books, sometimes they're dated, sometimes they're damaged, they need to be retired. So books have a life expectancy, especially when they're heavily used. So a lot of need for books, and university books in particular. Yeah, Rotary, the very first shipments were all financed by Rotary. Yeah, sometimes they'll work together. So most recently, the Rotary Club, there were about 5-6 Rotary clubs that came in together. The Rotary Club of Northfield led an effort, and we sent 5 containers to South Sudan. The U.S. Department of Defense provided some donated shipping on that, and then the Rotary clubs covered the rest. They raised, I think, $25,000 between like 6 clubs. The advantage of Rotary is there's a match, of course, any Rotarians here know. So every dollar that's raised, there's a match, a district match, so it's a dollar for dollar match. So, you know, that Rotary Club and colleagues probably raised like 12,000 of that, and the district did 12,000. So great deal. We had a Rotarian from Duluth that just stopped in the warehouse, and, you know, that Rotary Club wants to send a container to Ghana, we think. So, you know, Brainerd Rotary Clubs, always welcome. We welcome support from anyone who wants to help us out. And a lot of times it becomes their project. I say help, they're helping us out. They view us as us helping them out because they want to work with a Rotary Club in Africa, and we're helping them out by providing donated books for their project, which is absolutely fine. That's what you want. It's not our project, it's their project. But in truth, we're working together. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the moderators, and thank you, everyone, for coming out on this cold evening. Appreciate your interest and involvement.